بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, most compassionate, most merciful, and good evening, and welcome to this exclusive screening of the film for the Birmingham Four, A Serious Miscarriage of Justice. My name is Mazam Beg. I am the senior director for CAGE, and we have been campaigning against war and terror policies since 2003. And of all the cases that we've come across in relation to whether it's at Guantanamo, the secret detention sites, we were at least able to uncover what took place there. But what's particularly disturbing about the film that you're about to watch is that this all took place not in a secret prison or outside the view of ordinary people. It happened because of the role of the police. 50 years after the infamous bombing in Birmingham in 1974, that's something that's still been spoken about, that the families and the relatives of the victims are still seeking justice in relation to 6 Irishmen who were imprisoned for a crime they didn't commit. We have a case of 4 Muslim men imprisoned in the United Kingdom, once again in Birmingham, in this city, the city that I was born and raised in, for a crime that they didn't commit. What brought us to this, what brought me to this, my organization and I, was the role of Gareth Pearce, who not only represented one of the Birmingham Six, but also one of the Guildford Four, who were also imprisoned for a crime they didn't commit in the name of catching terrorists, and remained in prison for 16 years. You will be hearing from her, Gareth Pearce, when I will speak to her as part of the Q&A at the end of the film. But just before you start, I want you to understand that the men who are in prison right now are almost an echo of 50 years of history. And one of those men that was brought together with me through Gareth Pearce was a man called Jerry Conlon. And Jerry wrote a book called Presumed Innocent. And in it, he writes extensively about his experience in prison. And there's a couple of paragraphs I want to read to you first. And just take the word Irish and replace it with the word Muslim, and you'll have an understanding of how this is a repeat of history. The first thing is that the Irish were constantly singled out by the screws and by the whole prison system as a special group deserving special treatment. The Irish were subjected to very particular forms of discrimination, especially in relation to visits. The Irish were constantly hassled and harassed and confronted and challenged to assert their identity as Irish. It was paradoxical because one of the reasons the screws did it was through fear of terrorist-type offenders, fear that they would mix with other prisoners and infect them in some way. Until now, there hadn't been significant numbers of Irish Republican prisoners in English jails. In Wakefield, I began to see how scared the system was of them and how it tried to contain them by isolating them from other inmates. The more important result was that their solidarity with each other was increased. As someone who spent at least a little bit of time in a British jail, in addition to Guantanamo and Bagram and so forth, I can attest to that. And we hear constant stories from prisoners who are held and viewed in a particular way because of the connotation that comes with their conviction. But what do you do when you know you're innocent and the entire system is against you? So I will introduce this film to you now so that you can get an idea of why we're connected to it and what's happened to the Birmingham Four and why it's crucial that this gross miscarriage of justice is challenged from the ground upwards, and that it is not allowed to continue to ruin these men's lives. So please, if we can play the film, and we'll come back to you after around 35 minutes or so with a Q&A with Miriam, who's she's the sister of one of the prisoners, and Gareth Pearce, who, as I said, represents them and represented one of the Birmingham Four. Thank you.
That members of a terrorist cell who called themselves the Three Musketeers have been found guilty. Three men, Nawid Ali, Kabaib Hussain and Mohibir Rahman, who from the West Midlands, were poised to strike police and military targets on British soil.
These men, along with Aziz, were very aware of surveillance and carried out counter-surveillance strategies. They used unregistered phones. They used encrypted social media apps to exchange extremist and violent material. They often met in public open spaces such as parks. We needed to be one step ahead of them and put together an operation that was bold, was ambitious.
An area near the city centre was evacuated and the bomb disposal unit called in.
The courier company just up there was a front. The boss was an undercover police officer. Hussain and Ali were given jobs there. And when Ali went out on a delivery, they searched his car and found a cache of weapons.
Incredibly important result for the police. These guys were known to MI5 and the police for a long time. They wanted to kill people. They wanted to follow Islamist extremist ideology. But the police mounted quite an elaborate covert operation up in Birmingham, that fake delivery firm, and they found the bag of weapons, the crucial evidence in this case.
In 2011, Khabaib Hussain, a young student from Birmingham, and his friend Nawid Ali decided to go to Pakistan for what UK law proscribes as unlawful terrorist training. As soon as they got there, they realised they'd made a bad decision, and they immediately contacted their families and then got on the next available flight home. As a result of this, they both pleaded guilty to engaging in unlawful terrorist training in 2013 and were sentenced to 40 months in prison. Of course, from then on, they would become persons of interest to anti-terrorist law enforcement. Indeed, in 2016, after they set up a chat group, they and other people, somebody called it the Musketeers, West Midlands Counter-Terrorist Command decided to set up a fake courier company in order to carry out surveillance and look for evidence of terrorist plotting against Khabaib and his associates. The man in charge was an undercover officer called Vincent. Khabaib had been working there for nearly a month, and the police had got nothing against him because there was no terrorist plot. On the 26th of August, when Vincent and Hadji, another West Midlands undercover officer, were present in the unit, Nawid arrived in his family car. Vincent got rid of Hadji on some pretext, and then he asked Nawid for his car keys and offered to park his car in the depot so he could avoid a parking ticket. Then Nawid went off to do his delivery. Vincent was alone in the unit with the family car for well over an hour before he let the MI5 operatives, who were going to plant the surveillance equipment in his family car, in. When they were planting the equipment, Vincent pointed out to them that there was a plastic bag sticking out from under the driver's seat. Quite late on in the trial, it was disclosed that when Nawid had left his family home that day, he had been under surveillance, and that he'd walked from his house to the car not carrying this bag, and it was not concealed amongst his clothing. This was Nawid's first day at work. He turned up apparently with a terrorist kit and given the keys to the car that it was sitting in to a complete stranger. The whole of the Musketeers' chat was disclosed to the defence at trial, and there was no terrorist plotting or planning for a terrorist attack. Indeed, the last conversation they had before they were arrested was about playing FIFA on Xbox.
Birmingham, the second city of England, home to one of the largest Muslim communities in the country. My birthplace. It's where I grew up and where I live now. It's also the place where I was arrested for the first time. My name is Muazzam Beg. For over 20 years, I've been at the receiving end of state harassment and violence. I've never been convicted of any crime. In fact, I've even been declared innocent. And yet, I've been imprisoned and tortured in some of the most notorious prisons on earth. In Pakistan, Bagram, Guantanamo, and Belmarsh, the UK's toughest prison. For all these years, Gareth Pearce, arguably the most principled and most respected human rights lawyer in the UK, has represented me. She told me about the case of 4 Muslim men from the West Midlands: Naweed Ali, Khubayb Hussain, Muhibbur Rahman, and Tahir Aziz. She represented them. She told me the case was one of police corruption. She had no doubt that the men were framed by the police and were innocent. Yet they were sentenced to life in prison. I knew I had to investigate and see for myself. I knew I needed to meet the families, meet the lawyers, see the site of the undercover operation, see the evidence for myself. I needed to understand who these men are.
So he's my only brother, and he's the second eldest after me. As a person, I think he's everyone's favourite. He's really kind-hearted. One of the key qualities of him, I'd say he's really honest, really into his religion, and just really sensible, smart young boy. I think I actually really love all his qualities, and I'm not being biased. For me, he's just perfect. And I don't think I'd say that about any other family member. For me, he is just perfection, and just as a brother, just how he is, his nature towards us sisters, and even towards my mum and dad, like he's just perfect for me.
But in 2011, Khubayb Hussain was arrested and convicted after travelling to Pakistan.
He decided to travel to Pakistan, unfortunately, with the intention to attend a training camp. However, they practically returned on the next flight home. We as a family weren't aware that he was travelling. We had actually thought he was in a mosque in a different city, I think it was Dewsbury, and where he'd spend the last 10 days of Ramadan there. And yeah, so he pretty much came home on the next flight, and it was 3 other young men. It was the 4 of them who decided to travel. They completely regretted their decision. Unfortunately, despite not having committed a crime, a physical crime as such, it was more the intention. He still was imprisoned, and he basically was convicted, I think, to around 22 or 24 months off memory.
After his conviction, he was obviously released. He would have been under some kind of monitoring and unlicensed and so forth. What was he doing up until the time when he eventually got the invitation to work for Hero Couriers?
Once he was home, he was trying to just get on with life and just really, whatever you call normality, just trying to bring that back into his life. So he was actively looking for work. He had a few jobs, which unfortunately weren't successful. Either if they found out of his previous conviction, they'd terminate his contract, or it was just a constant struggle in terms of finding that employment. But I think he just made a decision that he'd continuously look for work. And he just thought, I'm going to do a job which is basic, probably doesn't need a reference check, just to get some money and just get my life back on track. So he was applying for pretty much sort of delivery driver jobs, and I think that's what he was actively applying for online, those sort of jobs, very basic level if you like. And he then got a call actually from the owner of this firm, Vincent, who at the time we didn't know was an undercover officer.
And so Vincent from Hero Couriers is the one then essentially that, as you said, was headhunted him to come and work for him at this courier company. What kind of package were they offering to your brother and his friend?
Quite an attractive package, if you ask me. It was £100 for each drop-off, so each delivery £100. So I think they sort of planted themselves as, well, their image was, I think, a airport recovery, lost and stolen sort of items. They'd be delivering those items to set locations, and it was £100, and that was basically cash in hand and tax-free.
Did they feel, or did you feel, or anybody else in the family feel that this was too good to be true? This was a really good offer?
So initially, I think Khubaib had a couple of shifts and he kept asking Vincent, how do I sort out my tax? And he wasn't really getting an answer. He'd ask me and I said, well, you need to ask him, or you might need to just register yourself as being self-employed. And every time he'd ask the question, he wasn't really getting an answer, or he was just sort of shut down. I don't know what Vincent's exact response was, but it was pretty much the attitude like, don't worry about it, don't worry.
So we're here on the road, right outside the building where Hero Couriers was operating at that time when your brother started working there. Tell me, what is it about this place that reminds you of what took place?
So this is the exact unit where Navid would have attended his first shift, and he would have handed his car keys to Vincent, who parked his car for him, and this is where he planted the evidence. So he had full access to the unit on his own, without any sort of cameras, where we believe that he put that bag into Navid's car where those items were found.
The evidence, as it were, include things like shotgun cartridges, a meat cleaver, and so forth. What correlation does that have to Vincent himself?
Quite a few, actually. During the trial, I think it came up that he was an avid shooter. He liked to go shooting, and I think that the cartridges that were found, or the shotgun, relates to that type of activity that he enjoyed to do in his spare time. Also, Khubaib was actually paid cash in hand, and he was given pay slips, like a pay pocket, and it was a brown envelope. And interestingly, the K, how it's been engraved into the meat cleaver, is very similar to Vincent's K for Khubaib, and quite a few other letters such as A. Now, we all have different styles of handwriting, but it's quite shocking how much that matches Vincent's handwriting.
So what you're saying is that the car that's driven by Naweed, your brother's friend, is driven inside of this building on the say-so, or the suggestion, of Vincent, the undercover police officer, who then stands accused, as far as the family is concerned and the lawyers are concerned, of planting the evidence into that vehicle.
Yes, that's correct.
The allegations made by Khubaib's family are serious. But of course, it's always hard for family members to accept that a loved one might have been guilty of a crime. I needed to find out more. See more evidence of the alleged police corruption. Did Vincent really set these young men up? If so, why didn't the court drop the case? And why did a jury find them guilty? Why were they sentenced to life?
So my name's Stephen Camlish. I'm a QC barrister, been practicing mostly in criminal defence for the last 40 plus years. This case particularly stands out from others as a miscarriage of justice, not in the sense that it's more or less important as a miscarriage of justice, but because there are so many indicators that it was a miscarriage of justice from the very beginning. So in many miscarriages of justice, you get one small piece of evidence, which then over the years gains in significance, and then you can crack the case, you can blow it apart, you can show that that one piece of evidence is false or whatever. But here, all the evidence, starting from the beginning right to the end, had so many features which were palpably false, made up, faked, deliberate lies from the beginning, that anybody with any open-minded observer observing the case and knowing the evidence would have realised that this case was a fit-up, a miscarriage of justice organised by a small number of police officers at the heart of the case. So let me just pick out a few things. The bag containing the so-called terrorist kit contained a very real-looking Beretta pistol, and it was in fact an air pistol, but nobody knew it was an air pistol until after 5 p.m. on the day of arrest, and the arrest took place late morning. And the officers took the bag and they emptied the bag and they found this pistol, and the main undercover officer, corrupt under officer, whose name was Vincent, described it to his boss as a Beretta air pistol, ? In his notes. And his boss wrote that down, an air pistol. But nobody would have known it was an air pistol other than the person who owned it or who had planted it, because it looked identical to a real one. And it was only the firearms officer who later made it safe several hours later who said it was not a real pistol. So that factor alone, of all the other pieces of evidence in the case, there's no answer to it. And the officer never had an answer to it, that he just didn't give a credible answer in the trial. So Haji was one of the group of undercover officers, but he was sent away from the depot where the nefarious conduct of the police took place, that is the planting of the bag, before it was planted, so that he wouldn't witness it or wouldn't know about it. And when he was sent away, he was told that he'd be required later on that day to pick Vincent up. But before the bag was found, so the bag was supposedly found at about 10 o'clock in the morning. So this is at 8:19 in the morning. Haji received a message from Vincent on his phone saying something has happened and you don't need to pick me up. Now, nothing had happened. And the reason the message was sent was because Vincent had just planted the bag and he knew he wouldn't need picking up later because all hell was about to break loose. And only the person who was planting the bag could have sent that message to Haji. And so what then happened in the trial is that both the prosecution and the judge tried to make Haji seem as if he was not credible or had a poor recollection. He was a prosecution witness who the Crown relied upon, but they basically dumped on him in order to make him look not credible. The officers denied that they'd spoken to each other during each other's evidence in court. And so at one point in court, I asked Vincent for his mobile, take it out of his pocket, to test whether or not he'd been communicating with other officers. Because as the case went on, the defense kept on raising issues that caused them trouble. So they had no answer to. So they had to speak to their corrupt colleagues in order to get an answer. How am I going to answer this? In an hour's time after the break, I'm going to have an answer for this, etc. And Vincent said, in answer to my first question, I don't have my phone on me. And I said, why? And he said, well, I leave it in my hotel. And I said, why do you leave your mobile phone in your hotel? And we had a session of, why does anybody leave their mobile? It's a mobile phone in their hotel. And his colleague, his boss, also said, we don't bring our phones out with us when we come to court, and that they had no communications. Anyway, subsequently, after a lot of digging and a lot of requests for disclosure, we got their phones and their communications. And they'd both been communicating with each other during each other's evidence whilst they were at court. So they lied about not bringing their phones to court. And we had two specific examples of it. One was just before a lunch break and one was before the end of the day when one of them was in the box. And they were both communicating with each other in calls and texts. They were also communicating with each other on a home phone over the weekend when they said they hadn't communicated with each other. each other. This was all before the jury. The judge knew about it. The prosecution knew about it. And it was just ignored. This kind of thing would normally stop a case. Not one, but two officers perjuring themselves about communicating with each other during the evidence. And it was just passed over as if nothing had happened. And when his phone was finally, we got his personal phone and his work phone eventually, weeks into the trial, he had said before he started his evidence to his colleagues that he was going to have to give an Oscar performance at the trial to make their story stick. And it was actually on their text. And that was the only point in the trial, that was before I asked the question, it was the only point in the trial where the Crown said they needed time to consider their position, which means they might drop the case. And then they had a weekend and came back and said, we're carrying on. So the police claimed to have written their notes as things happened on a daily basis. And they timed their notes, and the main officer, Vincent, timed it to the minute. So any event that was relevant, he timed. Unfortunately, he was caught out by an email that was timed. He got the date wrong. So he put a whole chunk of his evidence 24 hours before it happened. And this carried on through the same notebook. He'd forgotten that the email arrived the day earlier. And so every note was he recorded events which just had not happened, right through his notes, and insisted on saying they had happened until I pointed out to him that actually it was the day after that thing had happened. And then he had to accept it in the end because the thing that happened the day after was timed by an independent email. That didn't make any difference to anyone either. The judge, the prosecution, nobody.
The story of how the DNA evidence in the case unfolded is very illuminating. So at the beginning of the case, the officer in the case agreed that there was no forensic scientific evidence connecting any of the defendants with the bag or the contents of the bag. So there were 4 unidentified fingerprints in the bag, none of them the defendants or their associates or friends, and there was some blood on the air pistol, on the gun, that wasn't from the defendants or their friends or associates. And in relation to DNA, the officer said there was none. So the trial proceeded on that basis until we discovered that, this is about 2 months into the trial, that on around the 20th of September 2016, remember that date, they had found a complex mixed trace of DNA from more than one source. The match turned out to be in the higher percentage that of Aisha, Khubayb's sister, and in a lower percentage a match to him. And the DNA was found on the sticky tape, which had a tissue attached to it, which was in the bag. So at this point, you're thinking, this is quite powerful evidence. Now, Aisha, the sister, and Khubayb himself gave evidence that they'd never seen that sticky tape. Aisha said, this has never been in our house, we don't use it. But one curious thing was that when they returned the car to me, all the tissues had gone. So she'd had some tissues in the car, and the used and unused tissues were no longer there. So at this point, the jury or the objective observer is thinking, well, there are 2 possibilities, aren't there? One is it is his and her DNA, and this tape is from their house, and this is damning evidence. And the other one is that they've taken the tissue, or one or more tissues from the car, assuming or hoping that a used tissue would have Khubayb's DNA on it, because you would, wouldn't you? And they've stuck it to or rubbed it against the tape, and the best place to plant DNA is on something sticky. So there are the 2 contentions. And depending on your perspective, it'd be quite difficult to come to a firm conclusion about either, until you come to what happened on the 22nd of September 2016, which was Vincent sending Andy a text, which was disclosed to us because it had to be, saying, "It's a sticky tape story, you were right, wink emoji." And of course, I put to them both that this meant that when they found out about the result initially, hoping it could be used, but subsequently it was discovered that it couldn't, they were over the moon, because their hope that the tissue that they'd taken from the car shared between Aisha and Khabaib, must have had some DNA on it because it was used, and they stuck it against the sticky tape in the hope that that would leave sticky tape on the DNA on the sticky tape. And neither of them could explain what that text meant. I'll just say it again. It's a sticky tape story. Wink emoji. You were right. I mean, what else could it mean other than they took the tissue out of the car and stuck it on the tape in the hope that it would create some DNA, and it did.
In all the text messages, for instance, you see, tell X to come in, it's okay if he writes his notebook up, we'll find the notebook for him. When the whole of the system's computerised, everyone was meant to put in their reports on the day, whereas Vincent has to make up an entire month's notes to try and get a different colour bag into his notebook. But it was acute embarrassment displayed by some of the administrative team, the civilian team in the police who were responsible for the record keeping or the notebooks or the computer exercise. There was discomfort there, but they nevertheless didn't blow the whistle. Any sane person would be put on inquiry that it couldn't possibly be true. What was emerging in the trial, officers in touch with each other while they were giving evidence, meeting in lay-bys to discuss their evidence in advance, inappropriate prior knowledge of what evidence was going to be found. All of it was, if you had been representing someone wrongly convicted and you came upon this evidence years later, it will be the key to the door. This will be evidence you couldn't ever have dreamed of clear police complicity. We could not believe that the jury could believe the prosecution case.
When anybody looks at all of these various inconsistencies, the text message between the police officers, the fact that one of the jurors actually begins to have a crush on one of the police officers and so forth, and I mean the irregularities, to say the least, in this case, in addition to the idea that they've planted evidence, the compelling argument that there is no DNA evidence connecting them to any of the items, no fingerprints and no CCTV. Why then did the jury, what's the reason why the jury found these guys guilty?
That is all in the context of, for the first time in this country since 2005, terrorist atrocities going on in the first Westminster, Manchester, London Bridge. It was so grim, that outside context. It was palpable in court on the day after each attack.
During the trial, there were a number of terrorist incidents, and they were the first terrorist incidents in this country that scared the public, because people died close to the Old Bailey where this case was being tried, more than once during the trial, including the Manchester Arena bombing. And so nobody wanted to take a risk of letting people out on the street who, even if they had been fitted up and even if they weren't guilty, you know, this was not the time to acquit such people.
It was like being in a time warp, actually, from cases in the 1970s and early 80s, where the police, and in fact more than any other, the West Midlands Police, planted people, fabricated evidence to such an extent that the squad responsible was completely disbanded and dozens of defendants convicted, one by one, had their convictions quashed. This case certainly rests on police fabrication and mendacity in the clearest possible way. It's a reprint of the past, sadly.
During my years of campaigning, I met some of the Irishmen Gareth is referring to. They had spent years in prison due to concocted evidence, police corruption, and even torture. I cannot help but think about another miscarriage of justice and a landmark case in Britain, the so-called Birmingham Six. They were Irishmen who'd been wrongly convicted of carrying out bombings in the city of Birmingham in 1974, in which 21 people were killed and more than 180 injured. The attack was blamed on the IRA as part of their campaign to end British rule in Northern Ireland. It wasn't until 16 years later that the convictions of the Birmingham Six were quashed and they were set free as a result of a long campaign originally started by their families.
The police told us from the start that they knew we hadn't done it. They told us they didn't care who done it. They told us that we were selected and that they were going to frame us just to keep the people in there happy. That's what it's all about.
There are many more people behind prison bars, wrongly convicted, not only Irish, including English people.
Police misconduct is not a thing of the past though. As the Birmingham Four were fighting for their case in court, the police and Home Office faced numerous allegations of abuse.
Of the numerous police spies exposed recently, Bob Lambert is the most senior and most controversial. Fated by colleagues as once one of Scotland Yard's most effective undercover operators in their elite special demonstration squad. He now faces investigation over allegations of firebombing, of taking a dead child's identity, of appearing in court under a false persona, and, incredibly, of not just seducing his targets, but fathering a child with one of them.
For my body to be used to gain intelligence on a protest group, yeah, I feel like, well, I was raped multiple times, wasn't I? It's like being raped by the state.
The damning revelations led to the Undercover Policing Public Inquiry in 2015, also known as the Spy Cops Inquiry, after decades of abuses by undercover police. The inquiry is looking at 139 officers spying on at least 1,000 political groups and has been dragging on for years. The police has apologised, but no meaningful accountability has taken place. Actually, by 2021, Parliament passed into UK law the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Act at extraordinary speed. The law allows for undercover officers to commit crimes with impunity, including potentially murder, torture, and sexual assault. It also allows for the use of children as spies.
The men have had their appeal. The only route to reopening the case comes via the Criminal Case Review Commission. That organisation is strongly criticised for self-censoring and not referring cases to the Court of Appeal unless it is confident that a conviction will be quashed. However, that organisation does have power to obtain what is otherwise unobtainable.
I'm certain that these men are innocent and they were wrongly convicted at the hands of a small group of corrupt police officers. Because what should really happen in this case is that if there's any honest police officers in this squad who know what's happened, and not everybody was involved in this conspiracy, it was just a very small number of people at the centre, there must be one or two police officers, possibly now retired, who know more about what went on here than they're telling. They don't have to say things in public. They can pass information, they can give clues, they can ask us to look at things or direct us in a particular way, but people know. Hadji knows.
I personally can't forget about him and what's happened to his life. They've taken his prime life, his youth away from him. We feel betrayed by the authorities. We feel angry, upset. I speak collectively for all our families. It's difficult for us to just carry on as normal. There's not a minute or a second where you can't forget, you can't basically forget about what's happened to me and my family and the other 4 and 3 men. So it's a daily struggle.
It's going to take an awful lot of shaking of the tree for there to be something of substance. This is a grim circumstance to undo. These men are not meant to get out.
Hello, Gareth.
Hi. Am I meant to be here?
You are indeed. I think we're just waiting for Miriam, right?
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu Miriam, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, alhamdulillah, good. Okay, we're ready to go, guys?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you all for watching this film. It's been slightly edited from when we first did the screenings across the country, because there were some crucial parts of the story that needed to be included. We've mostly, in all the screenings we've done around the country, including in Parliament, had the presence of somebody who features quite a lot in the film, Stephen Camlish, and he is somebody that has been very active, very vocal across the board because of how he feels strongly and because he knows the case so intimately well. So I think he's not well at the moment, but he has really been a wondrous help in helping to put the film together. I have with me Miriam, who is Khabaib Hussein's sister, and who also has shared the platform with me many times in airing the film, and of course Gareth Pearce, who's represented almost everyone in the UK. What I wanted to do firstly is just to ask a few questions from both Gareth and to Miriam, and then we'll open it up to questions from our viewers. I think we have something around 85 or 90 viewers at the moment. The case, Miriam, is now, we've done a whole host of screenings across, and when I first heard about the case, I have to say I wasn't convinced until Gareth told me about it. And then when Gareth said that these men have been set up, I really started to take note. And when we met, of course, with you, and we'd heard about the podcast that had been done, we thought that the case had not been given the justice that it was due. Can you just tell me what you felt like when we took the film to Parliament and there were so many people interested in what was taking place? How did you feel from the point at which you felt, I guess, totally abandoned, to the point at which now this is a cause that parliamentarians are taking up?
Yes, so it's been a long journey, and firstly, I think I've got to thank Gareth, Steve, and Cage, and yourself, who've been part of the journey since the start. When we got it to Parliament, what was pretty much obvious was actually there are people who do care about this cause, and these were people in a room that were not afraid of the word terrorism, because I think that's the word that scares everyone to date. And being Muslim, you'd think that we'd have maybe more Muslims that were supporting this. There's actually many non-Muslims who have been part of us and advocated and have been part of this journey now. And this is why we've got to where we have, with support from the All Parliamentary Miscarriages of Justice group.
Gareth, you may recall that when we met many years ago, I think before the war on terror began, you said presciently that it was the Irish first and the Muslims are next. When you saw and encountered what happened to Jerry Conlon and to the Birmingham Six, could you have ever envisaged, from what you knew about how the police operated, that this could ever happen again? Did you think that the tools were in place to ensure that a Guildford Four or a Birmingham Six never happens again, or were you afraid that it probably would?
There was a time in 1989 when the Guildford Four was suddenly released, when it was like a seismic shock, and the state was forced to admit that 4 people had been buried alive in English jails who were entirely innocent, and so had their families, wrongly convicted of having touched explosives on the basis of fabricated forensic evidence. And then it became like a tidal wave, because then it was the Birmingham Six, totally innocent, 6 men. And then it was Judith Ward, and then it was on and on and on. The shocking discovery by the wider public that this had happened in our system of justice, and it was thought this could never happen again. And although what we talked about what happened to Muslims in the future might happen because there were warning signs, what began to happen was a distortion of the conventional criminal justice system, where it became secret courts and it became use of control orders or internment or deportation to countries that would torture. This case is different, because this is bang in the middle of the same model, which is you take the conventional criminal justice system and you fabricate evidence and you do it in full sight of a jury and you get convictions, because the people you've targeted are from a suspect community as you see it, and you exploit that to the hilt. And so this is a reproduction of the same pattern, the same model, and it's the same feeling that it's stuck and it has to be pulled out. It can't be sustained, but it is so similar an experience. It's so similar and so crude and so exploitative and so cynical in every way.
Thank you, Gareth. Sadly, Jerry Conlon is no longer with us, but I know had he been around, he would have been the first person to speak up about this. I know Paddy Hill, who's seen in the film, is also somebody that's been deeply affected by what took place, and he's on record several times saying that stand by the Muslim community because of what happened to us. Don't let it happen to them. And he said that a while back. There's this very powerful interview he has on BBC Hard Talk when he talks about that in great detail, and I really wish him well and hope he gets well. Mariam, you know that I've asked you this kind of question often, but when we made the film and we put it out, we thought that we'd do some screenings, and today, finally, after all those screenings, we're making the film public and it will be out there, and we hope and pray that it becomes a cause and a film that people in power and decision-making positions can get to see. What do you hope to achieve in the short term and in the long term?
So the CCRC application's been submitted now, thanks to Gareth. And
so can I just 1 second? Could the CCRC is such an important thing. Before you answer that, can I ask Gareth quickly to explain what the CCRC is, because it's so linked to what happened to the Irish?
It was set up. It was in fact announced within.
So the CCRC is the Criminal Cases Review Commission.
Yes, and set up to replace the Home Office, which had the role before to refer cases back to the Court of Appeal to reconsider convictions. So it's the route by which wrongly convicted person could hope to have their conviction quashed, and that organisation was announced at the end of the quashing of the convictions of the Birmingham Six, that there had to be a proper institution, properly funded, to achieve this, and it is regarded as a colossal disappointment.
Okay, so this organisation that literally grew out of the convictions, the false convictions of the Birmingham Six and the Guildford Four, we'd expect it them to have acted a lot sooner. So Mariam, then could you carry on in what you expected and what has happened with the CCRC?
Yeah, so in order to submit an application to the CCRC, you need to get fresh new evidence. So in our case, the evidence is there glaring at us. It's black and white. There is none, right? The men were just convicted. It was fabricated. We want the CCRC to use their special powers to truly investigate and do whatever they need to do to get what they need and to bring the 4 men home. I would also want a public inquiry into West Midlands Police. Why is it that a special projects team, a mysterious team that nobody seems to know about, can just get away with this? You know, we've been banging on several doors, whether that's the police crime commissioner, the IOPC. No one has been willing to listen to us. There's been so much focus and attention on the Met Police. But if you are being policed by West Midlands Police and you've heard this story, we should all be concerned, because this could happen to any one of us. You could be looking for a job and your first day at work, a bag is planted in your car and then you are sentenced for 20 years. How could that be?
My final question to you, Gareth, before I go to people, there's several questions coming in, is this: that in the case of the Birmingham Six, you said this, had there been an anonymity order placed which protects the identity of the police officers who'd planted the evidence, who'd essentially made the convictions unsafe and unsatisfactory as a result of what they'd done, had there been anonymity in their cases, would the Birmingham Six and the Guildford Four still be in prison?
It's quite possible. Certainly with the Birmingham Six, one of the ways in which the convictions, there came to be leverage for the convictions because of the pattern of fabrication that the members of the West Midlands Serious Crime Squad had perpetrated. And you could go to prisons and you could ask, has anyone been convicted by this squad? And find that there will be people in the prison who had all been convicted on different fabricated evidence with similar patterns by the same squad. You could build up. You've no idea who he is. It was claimed they didn't have his fingerprints, that they didn't have his DNA, that they could give no information whatsoever about his identity for his protection. So he had a license to get away with what he did.
And indeed, put on an Oscar performance while he's doing it. So there's some questions that are coming through from some of the audience. This question is, let's have a look. This is from Joe. He or she says, thank you for this eye-opening film and the call to action. I'm trying to understand the motivation for framing these four men. What's the driver for this corruption? Gareth?
There was the phrase that was used to be used. It was a ridiculous phrase called noble cause corruption, which the police sort of adopted, that the means justified the end. If you decided that someone was dangerous and needed to be taken out, then you could do whatever it took to take them out. And that was the repetitive exercise in case after case after case.
Okay. And I guess that's, we'd have thought with the advancement of policing, with the institutions that exist now to hold the police to account, that things would have changed, but it seems obviously not as much as was required. There's a question from Ahsan. He says, may Allah make it easy. How hopeful are you with the appeal, essentially, I guess, the appeal to the CCRC? Mariam?
There's nothing that we can do but have hope. Gareth's written an amazing application. I think that, we're in a different era now. People are waking up, this stuff does happen. And I'm extremely hopeful that we'll get justice.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something that Paddy Hill said in the interview with Stephen Sacker on BBC Hard Talk, in which he said that it wasn't the politicians, it wasn't the people in power that shook this case, it was from the ground. And I think that's what's happening. A question for Mariam: what does your brother feel about this campaign, knowing that there are people who have not met him and are fighting for him?
He's forever grateful, honestly. He actually gave me, I'll share a little story. He explained that there was another brother in prison recently, and you have to do these courses in prison to basically downgrade your category, if you like, and that's your exit route. And there's a famous case, and a brother called Omar Benguit, who's also fighting a miscarriage of justice. Him and Omar were there, and this brother approached them, and he kept questioning them. Why are you both not doing those courses? Like, why don't you just pack it in? It'll be a quicker way to get out and release. And my brother said, how dare I, I want to hold my head up high. My sister's campaigning, I've got people like Cage campaigning, I've got Gareth. We've not done anything, we're innocent. We're going to fight this to the end. And, in Omar Benguit's case, he's been in prison over 20 years and he's still fighting. So he's forever grateful, and he's just praying for justice.
Yeah, thank you. A question from somebody from the audience. Somebody called Intellectual Assassin, for Gareth. How do I get involved in miscarriages of justice work? As a law student, I'm wanting to specialize in this area.
It's very sad. There's an area to be specialized in. It's not going to make a law student rich. It is almost not an area. It's a commitment to political action, which, you know, should govern our lives individually, whatever we do. And so there are meetings about this case. There is a campaign, and there are lawyers for what it's worth. But I think the driving force is that whatever someone could do is enormously important, and it isn't necessarily through the law that it's going to come to an end. I'm trying to work out what I could say that wouldn't be just an excuse for not suggesting that legal participation is a good recommendation. It's just that I think it's not. I think it's that what is happening here, a collective of people talking to each other about it, is actually a mechanism that can have some effect. So if this meeting tonight produces, for instance, a suggestion that those who are watching could also connect with their members of parliament, could start a small group themselves, that each member of the group could start a small group, and so on. That's actually how it was with Birmingham and Guildford. You know, it wasn't a grand campaign from the outset at all. You know, in the 80s even, you know, you would go to talk to a meeting and you'd think yourself lucky if 5 people were there. It was spreading the word, and we're in a different world today of ways of spreading the word.
Thank you for that, Gareth. And indeed, there were several MPs present at the parliamentary meeting where we spoke about this case in depth, and the meeting was so big they had to change the rooms, if you recall, to where the Labour Party hold their weekly meetings, and there were MPs present, and I believe at least one of those MPs has shared this link this evening. So we do have people who are in positions of at least some position in Parliament that might be able to assist and have followed through on what they said they would do. Another question, please tell us, I don't know who this is from, SA, please tell us more about your brother's journey in prison and his mental health. I hope he's okay. Prayers for all innocent people languishing in prison. For Mariam.
UK prisons are not easy. He's in Long Lartin, and the other 3 brothers are also in Category A prisons. You have your days, but I think the one thing that's getting them all through this is the fact that they know that they're innocent, right? That's what's keeping them going, and it's patience. He's actually written a poem, but I'm not going to read it all because it's 2 pages long, and I promised to send it to Cage first, but I'll just read a little bit. The bag was planted, I said it clear. I stand tall and I have no fear. I found a beautiful patience in this trial, and as I continue to strive, I have the Lord Almighty and the truth on my side. And I'll share that further later.
Thank you. A question from Amina Awad. She says, are similar cases being discovered in other countries in Europe, and are police throughout Europe working together, learning from each other in conducting such elaborate plots to frame innocent Muslims? I don't know. don't know.
I don't
Gareth,
think.
are you aware of any similar types of cases
Oh,
taking
we know
place?
that in America, it's a big thing. I know we're going outside of Europe, but they call it the USA Terror Factory, which is
Right.
basically this, right? And if
Yeah,
you
so
watch series
yeah,
like that,
in the US, there's, I mean, entrapment is quite a big thing, isn't it? But here in the UK, I don't know to what extent, and indeed they're asking about are there similar cases in Europe, and I don't know the answer to that.
There have been, there's a very broad generosity given in American criminal justice system to entrapment and sting operations.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been a series of operations where individuals who would not have been committing a crime in the country they lived in for political protest, political dissent, have been lured to a country to which an extradition request could be sent, or have been prosecuted for political activism in which FBI agents have lured them into admission of something that was never their intention. So there are those cross-country, inter-country cooperations, shamefully, always have been and probably always will be.
Thank you. There's just, before I read the other messages, one I've seen from somebody called Abdul Latif Nasser. Now, Abdul Latif Nasser is somebody I know well, and that's because he was imprisoned without charge or trial in Guantanamo for 20 years. And I visited him recently in Morocco. He just simply saying, thank you for sharing this. May Allah bless you and bring justice and freedom to the brothers and oppressed brothers and sisters around the world. Amen. There's a question here from Mindy Sana. She says, I'm so sorry for what has happened to your families, to you and your families, and I pray that your appeal is successful, inshallah. It is the first time I've heard of this case, which is astounding considering how we as Muslims are easy targets. What do you think this case, why do you think this case has been kept so quiet, and how much public exposure has it had so far?
Shall I take that?
Sure.
I think initially it's the stigma around the word terrorism. I think in the community at the start, we didn't get much support because there's just so much fear. And that continued over the years. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, you know, the times are changing now. So we're hopeful that people are becoming more aware and will speak about this case and any other case. But I think ultimately it's to do with the fact that they had a previous conviction and it's all related to terrorism.
Okay.
I think the trial took a long time, and we stupidly, naively thought at each major revelation of police mendacity or fabrication that would be the end of it. But right towards the end, there were some journalists, there was one particular one, had been there throughout the whole trial, and the journalists had a copy to read in court of all the messages, the fabricated confessions and predictions and all of that. And at the end, I did speak to that particular journalist and said, you know, whatever happens in this case, you've got a job to do. You've been here throughout. This is an extraordinary story. But the men were convicted, and neither that journalist nor anyone else wrote about the course of the trial. The only honourable journalist was the Guardian journalist who overheard police officers in court during a break talking about how one of the jurors had asked the clerk of the court if the officer in charge of the case was married, because she was very interested in him. A shocking affair. He'd given evidence. The jury were listening to this officer, and yet the jury group as a whole knew of the one juror's interest. And there was a flurry. The journalist responsibly wrote to the Ministry of Justice to ask what this was about, and the judge and the clerk and there was an inquiry. This was right at the end of the case. But even with all of this, it was effectively an unrecorded trial. There were oddities at the end. The judge, who was no friend of the defence, didn't give out the usual thanks to the police or commendations, which will often be the case. There was a definite feeling of acute discomfort, but they got a conviction. That was what counted.
And I remember speaking, Gareth, to somebody from a media organisation, I mean, a major media organisation, who he felt, because he'd been covering the trial for quite some time, he was shocked. In fact, he was shocked with the evidence that he'd seen thus far, and he was convinced that the men were going to be found not guilty. But then when they were, nothing, not a peep from him. And I wonder whether that is an indication of a complete kind of resignation to that. If a person's found guilty through a jury, then that is it. That is, the Lord has spoken. It's almost to that extent, and there can be no miscarriage of justice.
Well, there's the mantra, which is to be respected, that we have a jury system and we put our faith in it. However, that's not the answer. It's the one that the Court of Appeal hides behind all the time. The jury convicted, they had all the evidence. This is why we won't undo the conviction. But jurors can get it wrong. Jurors do get it wrong, have got it wrong. And in this case, they got it spectacularly wrong.
So here's a question from the audience, somebody called Jarir. He says, if or when the case of these brothers is quashed, what would happen to the officers, to the police officers? Will they be left alone or put on trial?
On past experience, nothing will happen. Past experience, nothing will happen.
I mean, isn't it this? I mean, I understand the question. If it was to be turned the other way around, that the police officers perjured themselves, were involved in some way, whether it's planting evidence or covering that evidence up and then lying in court and so forth. These are all arrestable offences. So why, if that was to happen separately, quite separately to the case of the men, do you envisage that could happen, or has it ever happened to police officers?
The officers who achieved the convictions of the Guildford Four were prosecuted, and the prosecution of their case was conducted with the prosecutor's hands effectively tied behind his back. And the defence of the police officers was allowed to base their defence on the guilt of the innocent Guildford Four. It was an extraordinary exercise, but prosecution of police officers isn't conducted in the same way as prosecution of others.
Okay, there's a question here from Muhammad. He says, please discuss the Muslim-only separation centre where one of the four apparently is currently held and faces staff abuse. He's talking about Muhibur Rahman. Is anybody aware of that? And if you can talk to those separation centres.
I didn't know that Mohib was in a separation centre. I didn't know that. I represent Kebab and Nuid, Mohib rings sometimes and we speak, and I'm afraid I didn't know that. I know somewhat about separation centres. They're horrific.
Can you kind of give us a little comment on what is the purpose of the separation centres, conditions, etc.?
As it is deployed against Muslim prisoners, it's on the basis that those in the separation centre have a particular ability to teach or influence others on what are deemed extremist theories or ideology. It's in practice outrageous. It's arbitrarily taking a very small number of men and removing them from the prison population on the basis of what is not evidence, what is, for the most part, an improper, inadequate comprehension of what Islam is and what a sharing of Islamic thought and ideas is. Clumsy, ignorant application of power, but what in practice it perpetrates is a form of small group isolation that is extraordinarily destructive. That it's the same repetitive small group of people, handful of people.
It reminded me when I was reading at the beginning that excerpt from Jerry Conlon's book, in which he talks about the singling out of the Irish and putting them into isolation and separating them.
Yeah.
And as I said, you could replace the word Irish with Muslim today, and you'd have a complete replication of where we are today. I think the final question so far is from Atten again. He said, is Vincent still working with the police, or has he and have his colleagues disappeared?
We will never know. They were always entitled to, as undercover officers, to lifetime invisibility, and the state will maintain that. The undercover police inquiry that's going on at the moment, still after years, for most of the officers, and with the exception of one or two or three whom activists have outed because they found out and exposed them, the others are all anonymized by HN10 or HN5 or having committed the most horrific abuse of political activists that's imaginable.
A couple of more questions come in. Statements. One is from Sal. He or she says, it's heartbreaking for anyone to go through such injustice. Thank you for sharing. Dylan Evans asks, how many miscarriages of justice do there have to be before we cease to be shocked and come to expect them as the default outcome of any terrorism-related trial? It's a powerful question. And I guess it's rhetorical. I don't know how you answer that. How many? One is too many. And we'd all thought that, I grew up hearing about being shocked by the Birmingham Six case, the Guildford Four, and the Maguires and so forth. And you do hear every now and then. Recently, we heard the case of Mr. Malkinson, whose representatives were there that day. We were in Parliament, and he's imprisoned again for a crime he doesn't commit, and suffers such a long period in prison. So it's happening all the time. And one of the things that I thought was so indicative of Jerry Conlon, Paddy Hill, and their passion was when they set up the Miscarriages of Justice organization, Mojo. And they recognize that miscarriages of justice are taking place all of the time to so many people. So the answer, I guess, to this question is that I don't think it will ever stop. Human beings are flawed. And there's one thing about making a mistake, but then there's another thing when you're actively involved and lie and plant evidence and then perjure yourself and are completely unfazed by lying to the judge as a police officer who's been entrusted by the public to take care of our affairs. That's I think, a shocking part. There's another question from, oh yeah, so Mindy again. As I'm listening and learning about this case here tonight, I keep thinking about another high-profile miscarriage of justice in the US against Afia Siddiqui. What steps can we, as the public, take to pressure on authorities and government to help? Cage and myself and Clive Stafford Smith are working on Afia's case. This evening's about the Birmingham Four, so we'll keep it to that. But please do go to the Cage website where you can learn a lot more, and also go to afiamovement.com, where there'll be lots of details, actions, petitions, so forth, that you can assist in. Indeed, there's a petition for the Birmingham Four that you can sign. That we'll put that link up wherever you're watching. And also there's a website for the Birmingham Four, just that you can see and follow the cases of all the individuals that are involved, in Khubayb and Naweed especially. And you can and should get involved in doing screenings of this film throughout the country. We now want this to be seen everywhere. Do these screenings, share the film. Once we send you the links, it will be a film that's available to everybody. We wanted to do targeted screenings. We've done that now, and so we want the film to get spread as wide as possible. A question regarding the weapons. Should the police have known where they had got the weapons from, as they were constantly watching them? I guess the question is, if the police are watching them constantly, if they're always being surveilled, then one
there had to be an admission by the police that they had them, each of them, under surveillance for about a month, and there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever of anyone having done anything, been anywhere that could have gotten hold of any of the bag or its contents. In fact, the bag, they got the wrong bag. They knew Khubayb had got a bag from a sports shop, and so they planted the bag in Naweed's car from the same sports shop. But they didn't know, because they'd seen the footage of Khubayb in black and white CCTV. They didn't know that they planted a coloured bag, and it shouldn't have been. So they got the wrong bag. They got the wrong DNA. They got the wrong date in the notebook. It wasn't that brilliant an exercise, but it was cunning. It was cunning. They didn't have some Islamic text. They couldn't get that. They couldn't have the handwriting of any of the defendants. So all they could do was scratch kafir on a hatchet. That's the best they could do.
I think it sounds, it really sounds laughable, other than the fact that it's
and it wasn't.
Yeah. So the Girl of Stuff. There's a question by the Girl of Stuff. She asks, there was mention of a law speedily passed in 2021 in the documentary. Could you explain this a little more in detail, as I would further like to research? I think that was the Investigative Powers Bill, if I'm correct. I don't know if you remember the legislation, Gareth. I think it's in relation to. Okay, I can't remember now. I think we'll have to put a pause on that and send you a link once I remember exactly what that is. but I know the law that you're referring to that was mentioned in the documentary, but we'll send you a link. Naila, if there's any more questions, are there any more questions? I don't see any further questions. One thing I wanted to ask you, Mariam, is a little bit more about your brother, about Khubayb, how he's doing in prison, how is his morale, how is he spending his time? Is he focusing on anything in particular? Is he hopeful, and is he resigned himself to his fate, or is he hopeful that justice will be done?
He's definitely hopeful. He's definitely he's doing okay. We go to see him every fortnight. We take it in turns. In terms of long art in prison, there isn't much of an offering in terms of education or extracurricular courses. So he attends a workshop, he attends gym, and in his spare time, majority of the time, he's either praying, reciting, and that's it. And you know, his day's basically consumed by that. It's quite a strict regime. It's category A prison. It's a really old prison, so they don't have luxuries that other prisons may have. He's doing okay. He's fully aware of the campaign. He's obviously hopeful with the application being submitted now. We're just waiting to see next steps and what happens with this. You know, this case is extraordinary. So we're really hoping that we see some change from this case.
Okay. I'm not sure if another question is coming through or not, but I wanted to ask you, Gareth, is that what is the next stage in this in the case of the Birmingham Four?
It's laying siege to the CCRC. If you happen to know the building in Birmingham, I mean, in every way, laying siege to it. You know, it's whoever can be writing to them, whoever can be calling them, whoever can be saying, what's going on? Why aren't you moving forward? This is so clear a case. Anyone who can do that is important. I was just going to say, when you were asking Mariam about Khubayb, you know, it's really extraordinary if in a case there's someone who's on your back all the time. You know, this is our fault. This wasn't other lawyers who represented Khubayb and Naweed. It wasn't. It was not coming into it years later and saying, you know, let me help you undo your conviction. We were there. We were responsible for it. And it's just, you know, I had Jerry Condon for years shouting at me from prison, and Paddy Hill the same. Khubayb isn't shouting at me, but he certainly is on to everything that can be pursued. He's watching everything, and Mariam's there, and Mariam's on my back. And it's incredibly supportive and comradely, but also we shouldn't sleep at night. You know, we have a job to do. And so I just say Khubayb and Mariam are quite a team.
Thank you.
Indeed. I know that he must be very, very proud of you, but also, you know, he has the best legal team, we believe, in the country. We know that for a fact.
Well, then they shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be in prison.
Yeah, they shouldn't be, but none of us should have been, right? Is there any final comment that you'd like to make, Mariam, before we close? I'm just going to check if there's any more questions. Naila, can you do you know if there's any more questions? If not, just give me a little message so I'm aware that we can wrap up. But in the meantime, oh no, there is something new apparently. something's coming through. Okay. Okay, so the question is, how much would this case have cost for the government, or how much would these undercover police officers have spent on the whole plot? So what kind of budget would they have had for this? Any ideas? Any idea of what spent on this? And was there a financial incentive for these officers in any of this?
The undercover operation was clearly very well resourced. They had to hire an industrial unit. They had to have a pretend delivery team of people visibly there looking as if they were part of it. So they had to rent these large premises, and they had to put a lot of thought into where deliveries would go. But definitely, it's not coincidence that there'd been a month. Kebab had been followed, surveyed, his car bagged, everything for a month, and nothing. So it was on the last day of the month, they say to Kebab, don't come in. Your friend could come in, Naweed, whose car hadn't been bugged already. So it was free for Vincent to plant for that missing hour with his bag. But it justified the existence of that unit. And amongst the text messages that eventually were produced, there was that mood music of this has saved us, this has saved the unit. This is, whether it's not necessarily individual officers, but it's individual officers who were able to do it has actually salvaged a whole unit.
I also think there's articles referencing it cost in excess of multi-million-pound case. That's what they're calling it. And I think someone put in a freedom of information request, and it shows you even like the legal aid bill, etc. So in excess of millions.
And again, this is one of those victimless crimes. Well, the only victims are the men who've been set up. And so I guess that's one of the things I find that interesting. I didn't know that, Gareth, what you said that in summing up, the judge didn't offer any thanks to the police for such a allegedly extraordinary case where the police were reporting they stopped attacks, all these people from committing attacks. Why wouldn't they thank the police? I just want to explore that a little bit more. What was the reaction? Did you just, all the defense team, when you didn't hear him say that, and you've heard that before in other cases, did you kind of do a double take or say anything to one another?
No, I think the one thing we did do, I haven't done it ever before, was when they were convicted, we made a statement to the press, a long statement explaining the evidence, saying juries can get it wrong, and in this case they have, to try to put a marker down for the future.
Yeah. Right, I think we've been given our last question, and that is that is the last question. Sorry, where is the last question? Yes, I think that is our last question. Is there any anything you'd like to say, Mariam, before we wrap up for the evening?
Firstly, thank you for everyone who joined. I would really encourage everyone to go away and just to learn more about the case, because there's obviously a lot that we've not been able to cover. There's a set of, there's a series of text messages that were exposed. This case has examples covering all areas, how do MI5 engage, undercover policing, joint enterprise, terrorism, you name it, we've got it all, unfortunately. I think to summarise as well, there were two officers, well, three, Vincent, Andy and Haji, that we don't know who they are. We don't have their identity, but there were officers in the operation who are named, such as Ryan Chambers, Simon Hussey. The force in itself know that something had gone wrong, right? We don't know who knew to the extent of what, but there are people out there who know what had actually gone on in this operation. We need people to come forward. We need people to write to West Midlands Police, to the CLC, engage with your local MPs. Any support we can get would be forever grateful, because all we're asking for is justice. Those 4 men should be at home.
Thank you. Gareth, any final words?
In the text messages, a couple of the police, older ones, are saying, it's just like the old days. Just like they're saying to each other, it's just like the old days. And one saying to another, I was very glad it was you who was with me on the day. It is, just like the old days.
It's chilling. That's a chilling note to end on. So finally, I have to thank you both for joining us this evening. For everybody who's watching, who's taking part, please don't just watch this and be active. If you still want to know more about the case, go to the Cage website, search for the Birmingham Four, go to the Birmingham Four website. You'll learn the details that are about the case, including those that you haven't heard of, and sign the petition. Share the film, share the links that will be sent to you, and arrange screenings in your communities. And we're more than happy to come down to wherever they are. The wider it's spread, the more likely this is going to get heard in places where it needs to be. And finally, write to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which is in Birmingham, where it all happened. The Birmingham Six happened here, the Birmingham Four happened here, and the Criminal Cases Review Commission can start the process to get them released from prison. So thank you very much, and I hope I'll see you all again soon. Take care. Good evening. Assalamu alaikum.